Diplomacy just made a stunning comeback this weekend. All it took was a bunker buster through the roof of an 85-year-old cleric's house. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, is dead. Killed in a U.S.-Israeli strike on his private residence in Tehran, along with several members of his family. Iranian state media confirmed it. Donald Trump took to the cameras and said, and I want to quote this as precisely as I can because it deserves to be screenshotted and framed above every political science department in America. Diplomacy would be much easier now. Easier. The man in a MAGA hat just ordered the assassination of a head of state mid-negotiation and basically reframed it as a productivity hack. The United States was, at the time of this strike, still technically engaged in diplomatic talks with Iran. Envoys were still envoying. Tables were still tabled. And somewhere between the entrees and the dessert course, someone in the Situation Room pressed the red button. So when Trump says diplomacy is back, what he means is the other side of the table is now empty, and negotiating with an empty chair is certainly easier. You win every argument. The chair never objects. The chair doesn't have a nuclear program. The chair is, in every measurable way, the ideal negotiating partner. Right up until you remember that the chair also can't stop the missiles currently raining down on your bases across the Gulf. And the word negotiation is now just furniture. So yes, the Ayatollah is gone, and diplomacy is back. The same way a house fire is technically a renovation. The United States called it Operation Epic Fury, which sounds less like a military campaign and more like a caffeine-boosted energy drink that got discontinued for causing heart palpitations. The stated goal? Kill the supreme leader, collapse the government, and have the Iranian people spontaneously install a pro-American democracy by Tuesday. The strikes hit military installations, radar systems, air defenses, and, this is the part where the word surgical really earns its scare quotes, the private residence of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, killing him and several members of his family. The confirmation came through Iranian Press TV's Twitter account, because the Iranian internet is still down. A grimly modern way to announce the death of the most powerful leader in the Middle East. A tweet from a website that doesn't load about a man who no longer exists. Donald Trump laid out the endgame at 2 a.m. on Saturday in an 8-minute video posted to Truth Social. Baseball cap on. The vibe of a man who had just ordered a devastating strike on a sovereign nation and was feeling pretty good about it. Destroy the military, kill the leadership, wait for the Iranian people to rise and sweep away the Islamic Republic, and presumably reinstall the Pahlavi monarchy like it's a system reboot. He also mentioned American soldiers might die. But hey, that's war. He then presumably went to bed. Now, I'm just a guy reading the news, and I would never dare into dangerous speculation. But I did watch the video. Trump appeared at 2 a.m. on a Saturday, baseball cap, reading from a script, with the energy of a man who had very recently been horizontal. And look, if you knew the bombs were dropping at 2 a.m., you probably wouldn't go to bed at 1 a.m. You'd be in the Situation Room with coffee and a lanyard, and at least one general who's been awake since Thursday, not squinting into a ring light with the facial expression of a man whose Uber just arrived, and who also, apparently, started a war. Of course, the idea that Israel might have launched a strike on a sovereign nation without fully coordinating the timing with its senior partner is absolutely unthinkable. Big Daddy America would never allow that. They'd pick up the phone and tell Bibi to behave, and Bibi would behave, because that's what Bibi is known for, restraint and obedience. It's also probably a coincidence that Netanyahu went on the record calling the US-Iran negotiations useless, right before those negotiations became, shall we say, structurally impossible. So no, I wouldn't dare connect those dots. I'm just a guy reading the news. The whole idea behind the strike is that Iran is basically a one-man operation, that the entire Islamic Republic is a Jenga tower, and Khamenei was the one block holding it up. Pull him out, and the whole thing collapses into a pile of freedom and pro-Western sentiment. It's the Corleone school of diplomacy. Make them an offer they can't refuse, where the offer is, don't end up like the last guy. But the thing about decapitation strikes is that the next head is often already grown. We've seen the movie before. Israel killed Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah got younger leadership. Israel spent over a year systematically eliminating Hamas commanders. Hamas is still operating in Gaza. The tunnels are deeper, the recruitment lines are longer, and the rubble is doing more radicalizing than any imam ever could. Yemen, bombed by Saudi Arabia with American weapons for the better part of a decade. The Houthis are still in charge, still launching missiles, still, if anything, more popular than before the bombing started. Libya technically worked, and the country has been a failed state with open-air slave markets ever since. So let's call it a win, if your definition of regime change includes replacing the regime with the apocalypse. Regime change by air power is the strategy with a perfect zero-for-everything record since the invention of the airplane. So naturally, they're running it back on a country of 90 million people with a functional government and a somewhat coherent national identity. Iran's next generation of leaders just got their promotion letter, and it was written in the blood of the last supreme leader. The new management tends to be younger, angrier, and significantly less interested in restraint. You cut off the head, the body promotes from within. Congratulations on the succession planning. And if you're wondering what the long-term strategic endgame looks like, what killing the supreme leader of a nation of 90 million people actually achieves over a 20-year horizon, I'd recommend Quentin Tarantino, specifically Kill Bill, because the entire plot of that film is you killed the person someone loved most, and then you went about your life, and then one day a very angry woman showed up with a sword and a list. Iran has a long memory and a large kitchen. And now we arrive at the single darkest irony of this entire operation. Could it be that the man the United States just killed, the man whose death is supposed to make the world safer, was in fact the primary obstacle to Iran building a nuclear weapon? The answer is probably yes. Ayatollah Khamenei issued a fatwa, a binding religious decree, declaring nuclear weapons unholy, forbidden, haram, un-Islamic, however you want to put it. Sure, Iran had the technical capacity to enrich uranium to weapons grade. It had the centrifuges, the scientists, the knowledge. What it also had was a supreme leader who said, God forbids this. And because of how the Iranian system works, that fatwa carried the weight of law, at least officially. And now I know what you're thinking. A fatwa? Cute. We're sharp people. We don't get played by a religious decree. And fair enough. The problem is, it's not just the fatwa saying this. It's also Tulsi Gabbard, Trump's Director of National Intelligence. Not Obama's, not Biden's, Trump's, who testified before Congress in March 2025 that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and that Khamenei never authorized the nuclear program he himself suspended in 2003. A May 2025 intelligence assessment confirmed it. Iran is almost certainly not producing nuclear weapons. When Trump was asked about this assessment, his own intelligence's assessment, he said, I don't care what she said. Then added a technical note, she's wrong. His intelligence, his appointee, her testimony to Congress, he doesn't care. Iran had the technical capacity to enrich uranium to weapons grade. It had the centrifuges, the scientists, the knowledge. What it also had was a supreme leader who said, God forbids this. And because of how the Iranian system works, that fatwa carried the weight of law. So the United States, in the name of preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, just assassinated the man whose religious authority was the reason Iran didn't have one. Congratulations. You just put a bunker buster through non-proliferation. If Iran's next leadership looks at this situation, their country under bombardment, their supreme leader dead, their sovereignty shredded, and concludes that perhaps the fatwa was a strategic error, that perhaps the only thing that actually prevents a superpower from murdering your head of state is the ability to make that act suicidal for the attacker, well, who could blame them? The lesson is written in the rubble of his house, and every government on earth just read it. Get a nuclear weapon, or this happens to you. The man who prevented Iran from learning that lesson is the man they just killed. And fatwas, unlike centrifuges, don't survive their author. Trump pointed to Iranians celebrating in the streets. Toronto, Los Angeles, pockets of diaspora popping champagne, as evidence that the Iranian people wanted this. That Operation Epic Fury was in some way a liberation. The diaspora of every country that has ever had a dictatorship wants the dictatorship gone. That's not intelligence. That's not a revolution. That's just what diaspora is. At least one school in Iran was hit by Israeli strikes. Over 100 girls were killed, elementary school age. Near a military base, which is the phrase that makes everything fine. And while we're on the subject of Iranian girls, remember a month ago when Western media couldn't stop running footage of the protests? Beautiful, photogenic, extremely broadcastable acts of defiance. Iranian women burning pictures of the Ayatollah. I'll be honest, I took the red pill from Morpheus a long time ago, but even I almost fell for it. There was this one woman, lighting the Ayatollah's portrait with her cigarette like she was auditioning for a revolution directed by Ridley Scott. And I'll admit, had I been 10 years younger and single, That footage alone would have been enough to make me quit my shitty white-collar job and book a flight to Tehran to join the revolution. The fact that she turned out to be a Canadian resident would have played absolutely no role. And look, the ground for those protests was real. People were angry. Real people, real anger. And they're probably having a good time right now. But the narrative packaging, the curated clips, the algorithmic amplification, the sudden Western editorial interest in Iranian women's rights after decades of not giving a shit, that part had fingerprints on it. So here's the contrast. A month ago, wall-to-wall coverage of brave Iranian girls defying the regime and the entire Western media apparatus weeping for their freedom. This weekend, 100 Iranian girls killed in a school by an Israeli airstrike, and the man who green-lit it calling it liberation. Same country, same girls, different footage. One gets a hashtag, the other gets a euphemism. And they named it Epic Fury. They just forgot to specify whose. Maybe because you know it's going to be a measured surgical operation when it sounds like the latest Monster energy drink flavor. These are the kind of names that children give to wars, and then other children die in them. Ambassador Chaz Freeman pointed out that the general populations across the Gulf monarchies do not support the United States. It's the leadership, the monarchs, the ruling families, that remains aligned with Washington. But those rulers are now watching Iranian missiles hit targets inside their own borders, on bases they leased to America, which were supposed to make them safer. The regime change strategy might eventually work. It's just going to change the wrong regimes. And then there's Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who will probably never negotiate anything ever again. Not a ceasefire, not a trade deal, not even a used car. Because here's the thing about being the guys who were mid-negotiation when your boss bombed the other side. Your credibility didn't get lost. It got obliterated. They were performing negotiation like a magic show. Look over here while the real thing happens over there. Except the audience was a sovereign nation with ballistic missiles, and the show didn't land well. Negotiating with America after this is about to get complicated. Not morally. Everyone expects dishonesty in diplomacy. Technically. Because before you actually do that, you may need to negotiate a pre-negotiation. A negotiation to establish that the negotiation is actually a negotiation. And then a third negotiation to verify the second one. It's negotiations all the way down, and none of them mean anything. Trump's presidency is now chained to a war he has to win before the midterms, with munitions his general said wouldn't last 10 weeks, against an enemy that just has to not die. He called it epic fury. He called it diplomacy. He called it, at 2 in the morning in a baseball cap, a liberation. And maybe that's the most accurate word of all, because Iran has now been liberated from the one thing the United States actually needed it to have, a supreme leader who thought nuclear weapons were a sin. The house fire theory of renovation works right up until you realize the only room left standing is the one with the centrifuges in it. And of course, all of this is pure speculation from within the matrix. We'll almost certainly never know the truth. Because if the Israelis did drag the United States into a war it didn't fully authorize, well, that's not the kind of thing America admits. Not because it's classified, because it's embarrassing. And empires don't do embarrassed. They do, we have always been at war with East Asia, and move on.